Welcome to the Streets and People podcast, where we explore having more transport options that are less hassle to use. Hosted by Get Around Caboolture, we bring you 3 types of episodes. People and Projects share stories of change. Not Everyone Drives gives voice to non-drivers. Road Rules 360 unpacks road rules for people outside a car. Music by Grand Project, and let's make our Grand Project reimagining streets made for people. Today we're doing one of our People and Projects episodes. I'm with Alice Woodruff, who I know a little bit through social media, and I wanted to know more about the post that you posted. I'm here on Gubbi Gubbi country in Caboolture in Queensland, and Alice, perhaps you could say where you are, how you became interested in this whole area, and also a bit about that post.
Thanks very much, Wendy. A warm welcome to you too. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm speaking to you from Wurundjeri country. I'm based in Melbourne. Because we've only touched briefly on social media, I thought I'd explain a little bit about myself. Simply, I work in a space which is encouraging and making it easier, safer, and really more appealing for people to walk, ride, and use public transport for more of their travel, particularly for local travel. And I do this working with major organisations, local councils and state agencies, organisations like workplaces and hospitals, and also a lot of schools, to turn what they have as their either big challenges or strategic goals. They might have local area traffic congestion or a rapidly growing population, or they're really keen to increase physical activity. They might have these big strategic goals. I help them work within their organisation and connect with other stakeholders to deliver the on-ground changes that we need to encourage a shift from driving to walking, bike riding and public transport for more of our travel options. That's really a bit of a mashup, not just of transport planning, but behavioural psychology, community development and organisational change. And it is really about integrating and connecting across a wide variety of people and places.
From what I remember about that post, it was something about schools. We did have Stephen Hodge speak about We Ride, and he mentioned something about a school on the Sunshine Coast and some gamification or texting. He said it was really, really valuable. I don't know if that's the sort of thing that you've been involved with or what you've been involved with in other schools.
Schools have been a really strong focus of my work. I've probably worked with dozens of schools across many parts of Australia, working with councils alongside to encourage children to walk and ride to school more often. And yes, RideScore, which is the program that you're referring to, is a really great example of changing the way we're travelling to school. And why that works so well is that it doesn't just have a focus on improving infrastructure. Infrastructure is really critical to giving people proper, safe options for walking and bike riding. It's very hard for a child to walk to school if there's no footpath or if there's no safe crossing. So that's definitely a fundamental thing that we need to have in place. But I see it, and many of us come at changing the way people are travelling by looking at it in a more integrated way. Infrastructure is a must, but we also need to consider safer speeds around schools, and particularly not just the school front, but the whole precinct. And we also need to look at the programs and other support that might be needed to encourage a change in the way people are travelling. Because fundamentally, it's important to realise and remember that our society in Australia is really car dominant. We have what's described as a social norm around driving. A lot of people, for almost all their travel, the car is their only option. If you're living in an outer suburban area, public transport is very infrequent or too far to walk. You don't have safe walking and bike riding infrastructure, so you're always getting in the car. To expect a family to then spontaneously change how they're getting to school just because the safer crossing has been put in place, we can't expect that to happen just on its own. So we do need to support and encourage people to travel in other ways, and we do that in a variety of ways. Some of that is really about people experiencing those new behaviours, and that's where simple events and programs like walk and ride to school days are really important, so that people can actually see, this is what's really good about getting to school in this way. Because I always come back to, what are the children saying? What's their need and desire? Often when I start a project, I go into a school and I have a workshop with a bunch of kids. We also survey all of the students. We always ask them 2 questions. how do you travel to school and how would you like to travel? Now, we know that in Australia, the answer to the first question, about 75% of children are saying, I'm driven to school almost every day. When we ask them the second question, they're all saying, I'd like to walk. And more importantly, we've got to say the favourite option for kids would be to ride or scoot to school. That is their number one desire. And in fact, that's a great sort of segue into talking about RideScore as a particular example program. It's great. It's delivered by Sunshine Coast Council. The start and impetus of the program was supported by We Ride with that council. I think what's really important is that while we focus on the technology, that really helps to overcome key barriers for parents. And the technology is that a parent receives a notification when a child scoots or rides to school. They get a little message to say your child's arrived. So that's incredibly reassuring, and that is addressing a key barrier that parents say they just don't feel confident that their child gets to school independently. The RideScore app and technology reassures them. Importantly also, that technology creates a gamification for students, so they feel really keen to continue to ride because they're collecting points and they get rewards along the way. But the magic sauce with this program isn't the technology on its own, it's how the council has delivered that in a really integrated way. They start with working out the best, most optimal schools to work with. Because we focus on riding with this program, if you run it in a really hilly area, it's going to get less take-up. But if it's nice and flat, and if you have other criteria for choosing schools like how close children are living to the school, is there good active travel access, then all of those things can help ensure that the program's set up for success. You then bring in the technology, but the key factor with this program that really makes it work is the exceptional level of council support and engagement with the school. So the school isn't expected to pick up this program and run it themselves. The council delivers it almost entirely, coming in and providing a really high level of engagement and support. Great communications back to parents and students. They're running bike maintenance workshops as part of that program as well. I would say that's an exemplar program. We have 2,500 kids riding to school. A lot of them, about 30%, are riding at least 3 times a week. So that's fantastic. But not every council could pick up and run with that program. The message here, and certainly working across schools, is that a lot of councils are doing great work with schools in their community to encourage children travelling by walking and cycling, and particularly alongside improving road safety outcomes by tackling and improving parking management, particularly also to help remove the access and the conflicts between vehicles and children walking and bike riding. The most effective programs are done in a really integrated way. So they are looking at infrastructure improvements, creating safer speeds, so reducing speed limits down to a 30 threshold, and not just on the school frontage, but treating it as a precinct. So we do need to look at the whole journey. Road safety doesn't happen or shouldn't be considered just at the school gate. We need to look at it from where a child is walking out their front door and coming to school. So the whole journey, it makes sense to focus on a precinct approach. Well, certainly I want to see safer speeds come in more broadly, because then it creates a safer and more inviting neighbourhood to move around. It's important that you don't say, here's a program and we need to do it like that. You need to create a program and approach that works in the context for your own council. There are some councils that only have one traffic engineer. They're incredibly stretched with the day-to-day issues across the whole municipality. A starting point for a council like that is, who can you connect with within council to support changes in travel to school? That might be reaching out to your health promotion officer, who might be more comfortable and more willing to go and have those face-to-face conversations with the school community, the leadership team, and parents and students. Together you can deliver an approach that you identify safe routes to school, working with the students and parents to identify where the real issues are and what you need to focus on to make those improvements, and then working also with the school on those behaviour change programs to help and encourage changes in the way people are travelling.
Just a couple of stories from my own life. My neighbour has 2 children and we are within a kilometre from the school that she goes to. They've just moved here and the kids used to ride a bike to school, but they don't now. She said, I guess we're in the habit of it more than anything else. The boy, he's got quite an excitable disposition and he actually does heaps better at school when he rides. So he's itching to ride a bike, and it's just more that the mum got out of the habit. So one of the questions to ask, I guess, is could I do that without any infrastructure change? Because sometimes that is possible. Here we've got a rail trail which is quite close and the kids are quite used to riding a bike, so that would be easy. And the other one was my friend, her little boy has just started school, and one of the things that she noticed as soon as he started school is I've handed my kids over to people and I don't hear from them all day. Kids are so, I guess, incarcerated, under surveillance all the time now in a way that never took place before. It can be quite a learning edge for parents to go, okay, well, I can step back here. It's going to be okay. You mentioned before about social norms. Perhaps you could speak more about those 2 examples.
Social norms are a really important consideration to understand because, as I said earlier, you can put in new infrastructure and you can have a good physical context. There's a rail trail right there that you can safely ride to school on. But without the support and nudging for people to take up those options, it is really difficult. And it does, as you say, come back to often habitual behaviours. This is just how we've done things. That's how we're used to it. That is where we need to unpack those social norms and work out what are the best nudges to help inform and make a shift. I just want to provide a distinction. When we talk broadly about social norms, there are 2 dominant norms. So there's an injunctive norm, which is what we approve and disapprove of in our society. Often we accept things that we wouldn't, for car-based travel, that we may not accept in other forms of our society. So some of the risks and behaviours associated with it. For example, we would consider, or we would see it with disapproval if there were 10 parents standing outside a school gate smoking. But we do accept that we'll have 10 to 20, 30 cars sitting idling with particulates and other emissions coming out that ourselves and our children are breathing in. We need to recognise that and respond accordingly. Another example of areas where we have social norms around independent walking is particularly challenging. In some social groups, they're quite comfortable. They might have a neighbourhood where they know each other, the neighbours know each other more, they know who's walking to school, there's eyes on the street, so people feel confident that their child is walking safely to school. I've been working in other schools where parents have said, I've been told I shouldn't let my child walk to school independently. That is a real challenge and we have to really acknowledge that. We can't just ignore it because that's the fundamental barrier for those people to help make that shift. But coming back to your example about those habits of, oh, we've just been doing it like this, that is where people need to be prompted to get back into their walking or their riding habits. And that's where a lot of council and state government programs have been running campaigns. They either do the Ride to School Day or they might run a campaign over 6 weeks where children get rewarded and points for riding and walking as much as possible. And if you're running a 6-week program, that does allow a family to get back into the habit of it or try these new approaches, get all their systems in place. How are we packing lunch? What time do we need to leave? It does trickle down all to the really little details to work out how it's going to work for each individual family. They're the sort of programs that help give a nudge to make that change. We as councils and state agencies need to then continue to bring in better supporting environment to make that change easier. Because if someone participates in that campaign, they have a lot of fun and enjoyment, but each day they have to cross that challenging road. That will be a blocker for them to continue. That's where these campaigns and better infrastructure go hand in hand, because we can identify as more kids are moving around, actually that's the pinch point. That's the challenge for people to cross the road. Or it might even just be the sight line, that children coming down on a footpath can't quite see whether it's safe to cross a road because a bush has overgrown and that needs to be trimmed back. You need to remind me of your second example about another family in your local area.
My friend, her little boy has just started school. They're always on camera now, you see. They take photos all the time. She takes a photo of her little boys when they're buckled up, ready to go to school, and she sends that to Dad. That's something they have always done. There is this hyper surveillance of children today. In a way, children are in captivity in the same way that women were before, when there weren't public toilets for women because they weren't allowed to roam. And in a way, I feel that this way that we are with kids is a little bit like that. We keep them really close to home. We had Tim Gill on the show and he said, we just can't even let children out beyond the end of the street now. If you could speak to that.
I hear you and I totally get it. I'm speaking here personally as a parent. My daughter's now 14, but I'm still very conscious about where is she, has she got home? She does have a phone, so we can have contact. But there is a level of, as you describe it, surveillance that I certainly didn't have as a child. My mother didn't know what happened between when I left the house and when I got home. And guess what? I got home every single day fine. I do remember a couple of times when in primary school, I would sometimes ride to school and we'd scoot down the hill. And one day I came off my bike and I had a big graze. But I didn't need to call my mother. I managed to get to school and someone helped patch me up. And another afternoon, I remember coming home, being swooped by a magpie. That was part of the experience. And I think we do need to feel reassured that we do actually need to be slightly uncomfortable and let our kids take those steps of independence, because research has clearly demonstrated that it is so critical for their own health, well-being and cognitive development to be independent. But how do we go about that when we're all quite fearful, myself included, about letting those steps? I think that is where it comes back to the social networks and the support that we have in our local communities to build those connections to enable children to be independent, so that they're not walking to school on their own, that they're walking to school with a group of friends, or they might be walking to school with a neighbour parent. Now, I would also be going, who's this neighbour parent? Am I going to let my child walk to school with them if I don't know them? It just highlights that we ourselves as individuals, as parents, do need to make those steps to reach out to people to help and support that change. So we need to say hello to the parent and make some contact and go, they seem normal, they know how to cross the road okay, and I'm happy for my child and a group of other children to walk with them to school. Those types of programs have been really effective. Some councils call them walking school buses. I would say, and my observations and certainly research from Vic Health some time ago has said that they are demanding to set up in a top-down approach. A council can't just say, let's run a walking school bus. I see the walking school buses are most effective when they are really grassroots coming up. It's parents initiating those contacts with friends and neighbours and saying, I'm heading off to school at 8:30, I'll be walking past this stop. If people want to join me, I can continue on. And then that does give the parents reassurance that there's someone there that has contact with their child. There are other programs around that are more formalised approaches that send parents alerts if their child has arrived at school. But that's an extra thing that a council has to put in and manage. It has been tested, delivered by councils within central Melbourne, and has been effective with some schools, and other schools you find there's big use by the students. They tap on and say, I've arrived at school in the first few weeks of the program, and then it gradually drops off. They forget to tap on, or they just become less interested. I think it does come back to much more of the old school, who knows each other and who's willing to reach out and saying, I'm walking to school today. Because if in a neighbourhood of 50 children, there are 5 or 6 parents who are willing to do a school walk one day a week, then that's a real opportunity that children can take up and be supported by. But you can't assume that a council can drop that in and it runs spontaneously. It does need support and ongoing engagement to make that happen. Another example at a state government level in WA is the Your Move program. It's been running for probably more than a decade. It has been really effective in supporting schools in changing how children are getting to school, and it has a number of components that include supporting the social networks. They have some gamification in there for the schools to maintain their support and interest. They also support the schools with really practical things that if you've made these achievements, then you've earned a certain amount and we can install additional bike parking, for example. There's a range of approaches there, but I think fundamentally it comes back to a lot of component parts because the issues are complex and there's a lot of people. There's the school leadership team, there's the whole school community, there's the traffic and transport side of a local government, there's all of the health and wellbeing and other parts of councils, and also state agencies that have a role both on a transport perspective and also the education agencies when they're planning and designing new schools. There's a lot of moving parts and we need to help make sure that system can work as best it can. I would do a shout out to Austroads. They're a national association of transport agencies across Australia and New Zealand, and they're developing guidance in 2025 specifically focused on travel to school. This is a really significant move forward because often councils are a bit unsure about where to start. Certainly a number of jurisdictions do have guidance, but when there's a proposed standard approach and helps present best practice and process for increasing safe and active travel to school, it just really helps a council officer go, okay, I can start here. I know who to talk to and how to go about this, what my role is and who else can help. I'm looking forward to seeing that for councils to be able to use that as a resource.
Just for our listener, when it's published, we'll put it up on our website. I have a whole lot of resources for transport professionals. One of the things Sarah Stace said, what she's trying to do with Better Streets is to say that if you want to start a group, any group at all, you just can connect in with Better Streets. Many people today have become quite passive, and I've noticed this when I post something, oh, you could do this. People go, yeah, it's the council, they should do this and they should do that. I'm paying my rates, and there's this idea that the council is going to provide everything, and of course everyone wants cheaper rates, so you can't have both. You can have council doing everything, or you can step into the space and then have cheaper rates. What do you see is the role for a person like me or you as a citizen, as a resident? What is something that we can do to help this happen? Even for me, I'm in advocacy and I have no idea where I can go.
Well, first, I wholeheartedly reflect and support Sarah's comments that we're all actors and have a role to play. The system isn't where we want it to be, and we're all parts and contribute to making those changes. We do need to start ourselves and consider what we can contribute. I think there's more impetus for parents themselves to take that step to make a connection with someone who lives locally, who they might be able to walk to school with sometime, or put their hand up when the school council's calling out for helpers to run a walk or ride to school day. There is also a role for people who aren't in that, with children like yourself going to school, and it is perhaps being a positive voice for change to council. Often the negative voice of I don't want change or these are the problems are the ones that get highlighted by council. Don't take my parking away, for example. So it is really important to be the positive voice of I see this will really improve road safety or our children's opportunity to walk to school if there's, for example, changes to parking around a school. Even at that level, that's a really important starting point, to be a positive voice for change, to recognise that there's the bigger picture around our children's health and well-being as a real driver and influence for the changes that we're making.
Yeah, I certainly got feedback recently from a very senior person in one of the state transport departments who met with me, who came all the way to Caboolture from the other end of Brisbane to meet me as Get Around Caboolture. The reason I got the meeting was because I was respectful, I was polite, I came forward with ideas that seemed quite thought through. It looked considered and was something that they might be interested in. They love that sort of feedback. What I don't know now is how can I follow up? What can I follow up with? I have a meeting with a counsellor or someone in the transport team, and then that's that. And I don't know how to keep that conversation going.
That is a hard one, but it's constant and continuing to reach out. I think I'm probably reflecting on two of your previous conversations, both James Lang and also William Bird, about having conversations. I think a point that James made was that there's not necessarily ever going to be the best solution. We have to find our way forward and look at the compromises and how we can make the best of our existing context and make positive changes. It does come back to having a focus on those broader outcomes. It's not just down to the individual car park or the line on the road. It is the outcomes that we do want more children walking and riding to school, and a reminder back to council that they have set those commitments in their transport strategies. The key part of my work often is bridging that gap between very broad strategy and the local level implementation, because sometimes there's a bit of a disconnect between what a council is proposing they're doing in a strategic plan and then what each individual officer is actually focused on delivering. A lot of my work has been described as behaviour change programs. That sounds like it's this bolt-on addition. We do some work over here and then you'll do that behaviour change program over there. But that is important to recognise that's not the right way to see it, particularly people that have responsibility around transport planning and traffic planning and management. We're all contributing to people's travel choices and options. How we are managing car parking, the pricing and availability of car parking, and the management of car parking around schools has a big influence on people's travel options and decisions. It's not seen as a program, it's all of these elements together will help shift our travel options. At the moment, our options are most often limited to driving, and a portion of people are making the effort and seeing the benefits of walking and bike riding when it works well. If we're working together in the way we're managing our parking, reducing our speeds on our roads, and improving infrastructure as well as providing additional support programs, then we get changes in travel behaviour towards more walking, bike riding and public transport use. It might seem like a fine distinction, but I think we all need to say if we've got the big picture goals of shifting how we're travelling and reducing our reliance on private cars, then we all should see that we can say that we're behaviour change people because we're all contributing to the whole.
You've done some work with councils and schools. Have you ever heard back from councils whether those actions, the programs that you've put into place, have actually reduced their transport spend?
Not specifically around for the schools projects, but that has been a critical factor for a number of my workplace projects. I worked with a major university in Sydney. They were at a decision point about whether to build a multi-storey car park or not. And our proposed approach to reduce the demand for driving to school by putting in a range of services and programs, and particularly managing the curriculum when teachers were teaching to spread the load of travel to the university, was a critical factor in them being able to avoid that significant spend. In that case, that's a multi-million-dollar budget that can be avoided, and that's a really significant win. I'm not sure whether councils have drilled down to calculate those benefits for the changes in travel around schools. I'm sure there's someone listening who might have that information. That would be a fantastic way to continue to present a clear business case for why you need to continue supporting this work. That's probably one point to leave on, that we do need to be collecting the data and the evidence to show and demonstrate the measurable changes that occur when we put these programs in place, because we do need that to have robust business cases to shore up additional funding. But I also would put a plug in for any state agency that might be listening. We need to see schools as an ongoing commitment. We often have programs that are run for a short period of time and then they're not funded anymore. These types of programs should be seen like an infrastructure delivery budget. There's CapEx and then there's operational expenditure that needs to continue to maintain how those behaviours that are occurring. So we get more children walking and riding, but those school communities change over time. Each year, new children are arriving and other children are leaving. You can't expect short-term interventions to affect long-term change. They are significant positive disruptors for change, but we need to come in and support them in an ongoing way. That needs ongoing funding and support. And it's not just for the delivery side, it's actually for people, council officers in-house to be doing that sort of work.
Before we close out, are there any final thoughts, closing remarks, anything else that I should have asked and didn't, and that you would just like to mention?
Oh, it's been a fairly broad-ranging conversation. I think I would just reflect back to William Byrd's earlier conversation a few weeks ago, which is it really does start with a conversation. As an individual parent, it starts with a conversation with your neighbour or someone at the school gate who's a parent of a child in your child's class. It starts with a conversation between a traffic engineer and other people in their council that can better support the program, the communications officer, the health and wellbeing officer. It starts with a conversation between local council and a state agency, and particularly between transport agencies and education agencies. We do need more joining up to ensure that we can have more children walking and riding to school.
I think it's been a fantastic conversation. We did try before and we had some technical issues, so it was great to have you back. I really enjoyed the conversation. I've learned lots, and it was good because I got to have an action that I'm going to take away from this conversation, so I'm really pleased with it. Thank you very much for coming on the show, and I'll put all the references in our show notes so that if our listener wants references to any of the other materials, I'll put them in the notes too. So thank you very much, Alice. It's been great.
Thanks very much, Wendy.
Thank you for listening to the Streets and People podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, share it with someone who'd find it helpful. Your small action could make a big difference. We're on all the usual podcasting platforms, so don't miss a single story. To find out what else we do, check out getaroundcaboolture.au. Until next time, remember, there's more than one way to get where you're going. Keep moving, keep listening, and keep imagining streets made for people.